I'll take these questions right here now. Will you please explain the meaning of "He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake"? That is just another way of saying that the skies show forth his glory and the firmament shows forth his handiwork. Whatever is in this universe, it's for the glory of God, not for our glory, and not that we of ourselves may be anything, but that God itself may show itself forth. So, the fact that we are led in the path of righteousness has not anything to do with us. It has to do with God manifesting itself in and for its own glory. We must get used to this idea that we in and ourselves are not it, but that it is the glory of God. It's, for instance, like looking at our gardens and realizing that the flowers in the gardens are nothing of their own sakes. They merely show forth the glories of nature. In and of themselves they have no glory, but whatever glory they show forth is really the activity of nature which they are reflecting, because no matter what becomes of them, nature still goes on reflecting itself most wondrously. And so with us, whatever happens in our human belief, God goes right on manifesting its own glory and bringing us back into line with it. That is something like this question. Regarding what you said this morning about the soul blossoming out, is it possible that after the bud has burst out, it can close again if one is pulled back into worldliness? Yes. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Definitely. It is a strange thing that the soul is sometimes wakened, blossoms forth, and then a phase of worldliness comes along and for a season at least has the power to hide that glory. We have seen it in this work. Sometimes a person has caught a vision enough to make them a very good practitioner, and even sometimes to send them out as a teacher. And then all of a sudden, the popularity goes to their head, or the overabundance of money goes to their head, or the pride of position or power goes to their head, and for a season they lose that which they had gained of soul power. You have that in the experience of Judas Iscariot. You have that in the experience of Peter. You have that in the experience of Doubting Thomas. All three of those people were men of illumination. Jesus would never have tolerated them in his midst for 3 years as disciples had they not been people of illumination, had they not been people of great soul capacity. And yet Judas, whatever the real reason was so hit with worldliness that he was led into the betrayal. Peter was so concerned with his personal safety and personal security and pride of not being considered one of those fanatics, that he lost his demonstration temporarily. And Thomas the same way. Thomas didn't have enough spiritual vision to realize the transcendental nature of the Christ. And so all three of those certainly lost their way for a while. Now, of course, there wasn't really one of the disciples who was worth too much spiritually. There wasn't one of them who was really a good spiritual character. They were on the way, and certainly they must have been the best that Jesus could get his hands on, but they were a very bad best. A very bad best. They didn't even have the stamina to stand with their teacher, their leader, their revelator in his hour of trial. Every one of them deserted him. None of them really had the vision that a disciple of the Master should have. Some of them made a comeback later through awakening to the mistake that they had made, through awakening to the experience of the Christ. And there it is interesting to note this. that even their 3-year discipleship with the Master hadn't completely opened their Christ vision. Even that. Whereas the resurrection served to open some of them at least. They saw it, they believed, and now the Christ really began to work in their consciousness. So it wasn't so much the life and teaching of the Master that opened their consciousness as it was the consciousness of the Master in bringing forth the resurrection and the ascension. So with us, we have teachers, we have practitioners, and the first thing you know, some of these people will start writing books and articles long before they have any knowledge of what they're doing. They can remember certain things they've read in this book, and they can remember this, but long before they've demonstrated, they're writing books and putting them out. And sometimes they know in their heart and soul that it's just a desire to see that name in print. Sometimes they don't. It's a lack of knowledge of their own lack of understanding. They really don't know how little they know. And so they rush into print. And there are others who start out as teachers, even as leaders in centers. And they get shipwrecked sooner or later. They haven't the equipment. They haven't the basic consciousness, the basic way. And yet, had they been patient, had they waited, there was an opening in their consciousness. There was an activity of the Christ. But they expected that in a month or 2 or 3, they were going to be able to do what other people waited 10 or 20 or 30 years for. That is the ripening of it. If you study the life of Paul, you will learn something very surprising, that in spite of that wonderful illuminating experience on the road to Damascus, it was 9 years later before he went out on his missionary trips. 9 years before he started preaching Christ. 9 years after the illumination. And that is exactly the way it should be in the experience of those who have made what we may call lasting impressions, permanent marks. You will find they were patient, they waited. Jesus didn't go into the ministry till he was past 30, and we definitely know that he had illumination as early as 12, and yet it was 30 before he was in the ministry. And we know that Dr. Buck of Cosmic Consciousness fame didn't attempt his work until he was quite a middle-aged man. And so it is, we have to be seasoned, and the mere fact that we have a trifle of illumination or a little of the outflow of the soul doesn't mean that we are ready yet for the big things of life. As you know, at this moment, I do not know where the infinite way is going or to what extent, but I have only one thing in my mind about it, and that is this. At least I practiced what I'm teaching for 16 years before I wrote the first book. And I had an opportunity to watch it at work. During those years, I had many people ask me to leave the Christian Science movement and go out on my own. I had many invitations to do it, and many opportunities. I spoke even when I was in the Christian Science at the Metaphysical Club in Boston, which is one of the New Thought clubs, and certainly I did a lot of work for Miss Mell's Center and for some of the teachers that went there. I had loads of opportunity to get out into the work and see my name in print or to see my name on a program, but I sat there in an office and I didn't write and I didn't teach for 16 years. So even if the infinite way doesn't go anywhere, at least I gave it the chance to be seasoned before putting it out. And if it does go anyplace, it is because it had 16 years of proof before there was one word put out for you to buy and believe, and before there was an attempt made to teach it. I saw it in work 16 years. Now, I've had students found The Infinite Way and read it for 3 months and then started writing articles about it. And recently I have a request from a student who wants to write a book about it. And they've been teaching it just 3 months. No. I know that in all these cases there is a development of soul and there is a fine consciousness coming forward, but let's not hurry it. Let's watch it. Let's see it come. And as we go into the practice and into the teaching, even then let us sit in the background with it until we become seasoned with it. In other words, don't try to run out and get on a lecture platform around the United States. Stay in a center or stay in a home and get a little bit seasoned with it among the few students and let them grow gradually rather than go out and through advertising bring in big numbers. Yes, it is. I have had the sad experience of watching some people come into the Infinite Way and go out and start teaching it and then break up and fail. And watching them do it because the prosperity was too great. The money came in too fast. The adulation came in too fast. The praise came in too fast. And you can't take it. And then it's lost. It'll come back, but it can be lost. Is our soul in our human body or where? No. On the contrary, the human body is in the soul. Soul and consciousness are one. Now let us understand this point, and then we'll understand the entire principle of spiritual truth. You are in me. You are not in a room. You are in me. And we are not in a room. The room is in us. The room is in me and the room is in you. I am in you and you are in me. We are not people outside of each other somewhere. And the way to understand that is this. How do I know that you are here? The answer is, I am conscious of your presence. Now watch this. We claim that in human language that there are 5 faculties. Spiritually speaking, that is not true. There is only one faculty. And that faculty is consciousness. Therefore, I am conscious of you. I am conscious of you through the faculty of sight. Of course, I can also become conscious of you through the faculty of hearing you, tasting you, touching you, smelling you. Regardless of which of those faculties are brought into play, the ultimate is, I am conscious of you. Those faculties are merely 5 avenues of one faculty. That faculty is consciousness. I become conscious of your presence. Doesn't make any difference which avenue of consciousness I utilize, I become conscious of your presence. You become conscious of my presence through any of the 5 faculties, but you do become conscious of my presence. Now then, how can you become conscious of me if I am not in your consciousness? And how can I become conscious of you if you are not in my consciousness? Can I become conscious of anything that doesn't exist in my consciousness? No. Whatever exists in my awareness, I can become aware of. That is now the great help in educational work. In the days of my childhood, it was believed that teachers pumped knowledge into children. And they used many, many harsh ways of doing it, even down to whipping us, at least with rulers. They had to push knowledge into us. Now, any educator knows today that that is not right. that the knowledge is already within you and it must be drawn out. It must be drawn out. If you were going to study music with a capable music teacher, the first thing they would do is to try to draw out of you the music which is already in your soul. They wouldn't try to pump some into you. That is why it is so important in subjects like music to select your right teacher, because there are teachers who have methods that are good, but they're not your method. They're not the one that will work with you. It is the same in this. You have to be careful what teacher or teaching you accept, because every teacher hasn't the teaching that is meant for your particular consciousness. Now, if you have a soul partly opened so that the spiritual approach to life is your natural one, your teacher can gradually, through this truth, open your soul and let out that truth that is bottled up there at the center of it. On the other hand, should you find yourself with some mentalist, you might find them trying to pound some truth into you that isn't acceptable to your nature. Just the same as when they first tried to tell me about giving treatments and tried to get me sit down and make affirmations and denials. All it did for me was give me a headache, and it didn't heal any of my patients. There was no use pumping that into me, because that is not my particular consciousness. It's not my approach. The way to do with me was the way my Christian Science teacher did. When he discovered that I couldn't respond to anything like that, he put a whole class through without teaching treatment, just for my sake. The whole class. He never once touched on treatment, and afterward he explained it, that he knew it was going to harm someone who was already deep in the work, and so he kept away from it to let that come out of me which was already in me, rather than pump something into me that I couldn't accept. Now, so it is. Unless I were a part of your consciousness before I came to Portland, you wouldn't be here. You may not have known me as a person, but you knew my state of consciousness from the books or the lectures or something or other, and you said, whether you said it consciously or not, the feeling was there, we are one. You have that which I want. I didn't have it. You already had it, but you knew that it could be brought out, and it could only be brought out by someone who knew what it was, what it is that you have. So it is. We are part of each other's consciousness. When I come to a city, I draw out of the whole city only those who are of my consciousness, those who can understand and receive me. There isn't any reason, why we can't have 2, 3, 4 times as many people in the room as we have. And there are ways of bringing them here, too. Don't doubt that for a minute. But in the way that we are working, without advertising, without efforts, without human efforts, I leave it to my consciousness to draw unto me all those who are already receptive and responsive to my consciousness. In other words, those who are already in my consciousness. And so, as you have been studying truth and reaching out to God, whether you did it consciously or not, you were reaching out for the teacher or teaching that could bring out that which was already a part and parcel of your consciousness. Now then, for that reason I know that you are in my consciousness and I am in yours. I have had the experience, many of them, one of a lady coming to me in a city on my very first visit when no one there knew me except the minister. And this lady came up to me in the lobby of the church and said, "Excuse me, but you are my teacher." And I looked at her. "I don't know what you're talking about. How do you know I'm a teacher?" "Well," said, "you are, aren't you?" "Well, it so happens, but how do you know it?" 3 days ago I was told that my teacher would be here, that I was to be in the lobby, and that I would recognize him instantly. And said, the minute you walked in the lobby, something pushed my arms and said, "There he is." And this lady has become a very, very fine student. Another lady writes me that she awakened in the middle of the night with the name Joel in her thought. She didn't know any Joel, didn't know what it meant, so the next night she dreamed Goldsmith. And when she went to her center to find out what it meant and who it was, they showed her the infinite way. So we've had experience after experience like that, showing this, that my own shall come to me. They are already in my consciousness, and I am already in their consciousness, even if we don't know each other humanly. And so I can say this to you. Consciousness and soul are one and the same thing. Your body is as much in your consciousness as I am in your consciousness, or your books, or your home, or your husband is in your consciousness. So your body is in your consciousness. And your body is subject to your consciousness. And the proof of that is this. You can change your body at will. You can change its appearance, its shape, its weight, in proportion as you change your consciousness. Now just think of this. Let us take a person and set them out on a full year of good, hard dissipation. And will their body not reflect some of that at the end of the year? Indeed it will. Couldn't help it. Because the body shows forth the activity of the mind or consciousness. On the other hand, let us take a person and give them 12 solid months of living in truth, working with truth, meditating on truth, thinking of truth, keeping their mind stayed on God. And do you mean to tell me you don't think there'll be a different look in their face at the end of the year? Or a different look on their body? You just know it will. Now go a step further and realize this, that the food you eat has no power to nourish you, that it is the soul of you that gives unto your food its nourishment and its nourishing values. And watch what it'll do to the shape of your body in a whole lot less than a year. Instead of your body being fed, overnourished, or undernourished by the human belief about food, your food will be giving to your system just what it needs. Just what it needs. Because it will be getting it not from the foods, but from your consciousness. Watch the miracle that happens the moment you take away from food its power, for good or evil, and give all power to your soul, which is God. And realize that only God, only your soul, has the power to impart itself to your food and to the organs and functions of your body that have to handle the food. Instead of trusting your digestive organs, your assimilative organs, and eliminative organs to work in accord with human belief, just realize this, that the soul of you, the consciousness of you, the very spirit or God of your being, is the life and the law under the organs and functions of your body. And the organs and functions of your body operate in accord with the dictates of your soul. Place the government where it really is, in the kingdom of God within you, to govern the organs and functions of your body and to govern the nutritive value, the nourishment value of the food you eat, and you'll find that you will no longer be influenced, or rather you'll be influenced to a lesser degree, by these outside beliefs, and to a greater degree by the kingdom of God within. In the same way, you change your supply. Instead of believing that your supply comes from marriage or investment or business, begin to realize that this soul of you, God, is the substance of your supply, is the activity of your supply, is the quantity and the quality of your supply, and that your supply is determined by your soul, by God, by the infinite invisible appearing outwardly, and that your entire dependence for your supply is on the infinite invisible. That is, of course, a continuation of the work we did this morning. You remember where we agreed that the members of our family or friends or church weren't good or bad, that we were placing all power of good in God, and we were placing all power of bad as non-existent belief. All right? In the same way, withdraw the power from person, place, or thing to be your support and supply, and realize that you have an individual relationship with God. If you like, go back mentally to your childhood. Separate yourself from this belief of marriage as a source of supply, or work as a source of supply, and try to catch the vision of your utter dependence on, well, in that case it would have been your human mother and father, but see that even their love could only have come through them in proportion as it was God's love manifest through them. Because lots of human mothers and fathers aren't good parents, you know. Lots of human mothers and fathers don't support their children or supply their children or take care of their children. In fact, many of them neglect them, run away from them, leave them on doorsteps, and all other kinds of things. So it isn't just because your mother and father took care of you that it means that that's the normal, natural thing. It means that in your particular case, your parents were subject to the power of God working through them. So it wasn't their goodness at all that took care of you. It was God's goodness made manifest through them. Now, forgetting all these other years when we've got so in the habit of looking on marriage as a source of supply, or on children or parents, or business or investments or inheritances, let us see if we cannot, within our own consciousness, get back to our childlike simplicity and say, no, I commence to see that I have a distinct and unique relationship with God. First of all, God is the Father-Mother principle, and I am that principle in individual manifestation, and that principle maintains and supports me unto eternity, just as the principle of mathematics maintains number 3 as number 3. It never lets it weaken down to number 2. Neither does it let it fatten up to number 4 either. It maintains the identity of 3 as 3. 3 doesn't do it to itself. The principle of mathematics does it to it. Do, re, mi do not maintain the value of their own identities. It is the principle of music that imparts to do, re, mi their particular values. And so it is the principle of life that imparts itself to us. And we of our own selves can do nothing about it, but we can show forth the handiwork of that principle, always show forth the full value that it imparts to us. Now then, take a year in which to realize, regardless of appearances out here in this world, that it is your own soul, it is God, the Spirit of you, the Christ of your own being, that with which you are eternally one, that its function is to maintain you and sustain you unto eternity, feed you, clothe you, support you. It is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Therefore you must take no thought what you shall eat, what you shall drink, wherewithal you shall be clothed. Now abide with that truth for a year, that my consciousness feeds me, clothes me, houses me, maintains me, and sustains me, that the soul of me is really the substance of my being, that I have an indestructible relationship with God. I have an indestructible and immutable relationship with God, and that relationship is oneness. And because of that oneness, all that the Father hath is mine. Now you maintain that consciousness for a year, and then tell me if some avenues haven't opened up for supply to you other than your present means of supply, or that your present means of supply aren't flowing to you with a great deal more of love and freedom than ever before. You see, the whole secret of spiritual living is within this. The whole secret of spiritual living is in the Master's revelation that I have a meat. that you know not. I am the bread. I have water that you know not. I have water that springs up into life eternal. I am the bread. I am the wine. I am the water. Not I must go out and get it somewhere. I am it. I embody it. I embrace it within my own being. The very Father of me within knoweth my need, and it furnishes it. That's all there is to spiritual living, is that withdrawing of the gaze from the outer world, withdrawing dependence upon person, place, or thing, and transferring that dependence to the kingdom of God within our own being. It's a transitional experience. It's one that we have to discipline ourselves into for a certain length of time until that moment of transition comes when it automatically takes over, and after that there's no taking thought at all. But that's the secret of what the world calls mysticism. Mysticism is any teaching that reveals the possibility of conscious communion with God. Any teaching which reveals our dependence on God, not on the outer world, but on the God within. Mysticism is any teaching that reveals the possibility of continuous individual communion with God. And so, mysticism, which is, of course, in its highest form in the teaching of the Master, mysticism reveals to us spiritual living, and spiritual living is a life completely dependent on the resources, the infinite resources within our own being. That does not in any way cut us off from ordinary human living. On the contrary, it makes human living much better, much more beautiful. For instance, Jesus prayed, not that you take my disciples out of the world, leave them in the world, but not let them be of the world. Just think how wonderful our relationship can be if we can commune with each other, cooperate with each other, share with each other, and yet not be dependent on each other, not look to each other, demand something of each other. Just think what a wonderful, we don't have to separate from each other. Oh no, let's keep our relationship the way it is and even let it become more intense. But let it be one in which each one of us here knows that whatever communion we have with each other is really a beautiful communion without an obligation, a communion without a duty, without a demand, since all we're here for is to share with each other that which the Father gives us. Not draw from each other, not be supported by each other. Oh no. Just here together to share. Well, today I may be the teacher up here and you may be the one out there supplying the money, but then next year it may be you will be the teacher up here and I'll be the one out there supplying the money. What difference does it make? We'll all be sharing that which we have with each other, but it won't be ours. It will be that which comes to us of God. Now then, in that same relationship, can't you see how much happier families would be if there wasn't a sense in there, let us say on the part of a husband, I have the whole burden of this household. Or the mother didn't have the sense, I have the whole burden of all this slavery in the house. If each one came to a marriage to begin with, not with the idea, which is most prevalent, of what wonderful things I'm going to derive from the marriage, but with the idea of what marvelous things I have to contribute to the marriage, not from me but from God. In that sense, then, the man would support the family with the feeling that this isn't my labor, this is the supply of God coming into my family. And the mother would have the feeling that whatever it is that I utilize in the home or bringing up the family isn't of me, it's of God and represents my contribution to the whole. Then instead of a dependence on each other, each would maintain their independence, their conscious oneness with God, and yet they would share with each other that which they have. Same with children. Too often the children are taught what their duty is to their parents. Well, they have a duty, but that seems to be the wrong way to teach it to them. The simplest way would be to let them share their contribution. What have you to contribute to this household, since we're all contributing to each other that which God gives us to share with each other? And then instead of it being a duty, it becomes a privilege. You know that as well as I do. The moment you put a thing on a person's shoulder as a duty, as an obligation, you've really put a burden on their shoulder. The moment you free them and say, you give it or withhold it as you are led to do, then you make it doubly joyous for them to share. So it is. It's a principle. Now, all of this exists within your own consciousness, therefore you can change it at will. If your consciousness is one, not of drawing from the other person, but drawing from God, you change the outer circumstance and condition. If you entertain the idea in consciousness that God, the soul, is the nourishment of your food and is the activity of the organs and functions of your body, you put the responsibility for the maintenance of your body on God rather than on food or muscles. So it is. If you see that God, the spirit or substance of your body and being, is an infinite and an eternal substance, you will quickly understand that there is no need for the body to age or get weak. But if you actually believe that food or the calendar has the power to determine those issues, there again you've entertained that in consciousness. And so, here is an important thing. We are governed in two ways in our experience, either through truth or belief. We either accept the beliefs of the world and let them govern us, and then we are humanly governed by chance, change, circumstance, theory, or we permit ourselves to be governed by truth, in which case we eliminate from our system much of the theories of life and the beliefs of life. But each one determines what it shall be, and each one regulates it how? Through an activity of consciousness. Just because it is true that God is the substance of your food and the activity of your organs and functions of your body doesn't mean that that is what's going on in your experience. If you have accepted the world beliefs, that food has something to do with it, and calendars, you are under that, and you will remain under that until you consciously make the transition, until you consciously make the change, until you sit down and think it over and reason it out and say, what have I been permitting to govern my experience? Laws of man or laws of God? Theories of man, man-made doctrines, or the laws of God? The same way that, I don't know how it is here in Portland, but in some of the cities, there is a great deal of astrology and fortune-telling mixed up in the metaphysical teachings. Well, I wouldn't know whether the stars really can tell us something about ourselves, or the tea leaves. Maybe they can, because if they did, it would be in accord with our belief. But one thing is certain. One thing is certain. And that is this: that we are God-governed, and God gave us dominion. And therefore, if we give stars dominion, if we give tea leaves dominion, if we give cards dominion, we have nobody to blame but ourselves if it happens to be a very bad dominion. Now, that's the answer. You govern your experience through truth, or your experience is governed by the world beliefs. A man, a psychic, told me recently that he was sure my parents were wrong. My birthday couldn't have been March 10th, because if my birthday were March 10th, I'd be very tall and very thin. Well, it so happens that my father's birthday is also March 10th, and he's an inch shorter than I am and several inches wider. So his parents must have been wrong, too, about his birthday. I don't know anything about these things except this, that we can permit ourselves to be governed by belief. When I was a youngster, I wanted to be a doctor. And we had so much sickness in the house that I really felt somebody ought to collect all those fees, except the doctors outside the family. But anyhow, I wanted to be a doctor. I had the urge to help people and heal them because we had so much sickness in the house. And there were two doctors interested in me, and they started me through pre-med. And one of them gave me a book by Professor Dana, who at that time was chief psychiatrist of New York State. And his textbook on nerves and brain was the textbook for Columbia Medical University and Cornell, and I suppose whatever other universities were around New York City. And I remember as if it were yesterday, I was always fascinated with the subject of insanity, read a good deal about it, and he was particularly clear on this point, that the insane asylums were filled with women who were going through change of life. That was the big devil that was causing all the insanity. Well, of course, that theory's been knocked in a hat long, long ago. No doctor accepts that anymore. But I was, during this last World War, driving from Boston to New York, and just out at the Boston line, a young man hailed me and wanted to know if I could take him on. I did. It seemed that he had just graduated from Harvard Medical School and was going down to become a doctor in the service. And so he started talking about the wonders of medicine that he'd just been studying and so forth. And how he did it, I'll never know. But all of a sudden, he started to talk about the mythology of medicine. Now, what is mythology? Oh, he said, you know, those false beliefs that have crept in which there isn't a particle of truth, but they've been accepted as truth. For instance, and lo and behold, it wasn't long until he was quoting this about change of life. Why, he said, you know, at one time our insane asylums were really filled with women having change of life. And he says, today you rarely find one. And when you do, it will be a woman who's been so brought up in fear of it by her own mother or neighbors that she has just worked herself into it through her nervous disposition and her fears. But actually, there isn't anything about change of life except a natural change of physical organs that would have no more power to do anything to a person than changing from a warm bath to a cold bath. There's nothing at all. And I went back to those years of reading Dr. Dana, and I couldn't help smiling. Well, of course, that is only one of these things. You might ask, well, if change of life didn't make people insane, why were the insane asylums filled with them? For the simple reason that they were accepting the medical belief about them, and they were subject to them in the same way that our women, most of them anyhow today, are accepting labor pains in childbirth. Now, as a matter of fact, it is as inexcusable to have labor pains in childbirth as it is to go insane from change of life. There isn't anything in the process of delivery that could possibly cause a pain except the person's fear of it tightening them up. The proof of that is now that we have, you probably read in the paper last week, did you, about this lady who had a baby in the hospital and 2 hours later got out of bed and carried it down to the nursery. Yes, sure. Today they release women from the hospitals in 3 days. There used to be 10, 12, 14 days resting after childbirth. Over in Europe, they go out in the morning and they hoe their potatoes and lie down at noon, have their baby, and go back in the afternoon and hoe some more potatoes. Well, it isn't necessary to do that, but it's possible to do it for the simple reason that childbirth is as normal and natural a process as nature can conceive. And it's painless, except for the fears that have been built up in consciousness. Now that they train women, and this was discovered by a doctor in London, they train women from the first month of pregnancy to realize they must not look forward to pain, they must keep their bodies relaxed, that childbirth is a normal, natural process of nature, and nature never provided for it to be painful and so forth and so on. And by the time the delivery comes, it is painless. Now we have all over the United States hospitals devoted to painless childbirth. And they are painless and they're drugless too. So we are governed by our beliefs as long as we are accepting the beliefs of the world, or we are governed by truth the moment we come into the awareness of truth and renounce the belief. Now, in the case of these young mothers, it takes them 6, 7, 8, 9 months, really, to get to the conviction that that belief of pain is unnecessary. And it has taken 2 generations to come to the point where, if you were to check at the insane asylums of the United States, you'd have a very rare case of one caused by change of life. In other words, there is a transitional period in which you have to train yourself to come out from under the beliefs of the world and put yourself under the government of God. So it's going to be with us in the handling of our bodies. The day is coming rapidly, and it already is in some truth teachings, where there will be very little or no disease from infection or contagion. I have had the experience of working with school teachers on that very point, and of watching whole winters go by way back in New England with little or no flu or grip in their classrooms, whereas all the other classrooms had 20 to 33 and a third % absences. Now, it only came about because all of the classrooms are governed by the medical belief in infection and contagion, and that belief governs the classroom. And in the classroom where there is a teacher applying truth principles, that teacher throughout the year realizing that this consciousness of mine admits nothing that defileth or maketh a lie, and everyone admitted into my consciousness lives and moves and has their being under truth, not under belief, but under truth. And that truth is what? What is the main truth of a spiritual teaching? There's only one power. God is the only power. If God is the only power, there can't be power in germs, infection, or contagion, can there? And therefore, the teacher, the classroom teacher, or the head of a household, who lives and moves and has their being in that truth of God as the only power, God as the only presence, God as the only law, cause, and reality, they free all those who come within range of their consciousness of that truth. Certainly I noticed in my early practice that every year I had many calls in the wintertime, grip, flu, one thing and another like that. Always busy in the winter months with things like that, and occasionally pneumonia. But I noticed this too, that as the years went on, I had fewer and fewer of those calls, and today, and for many years past, where I have been handling anything from 70, 80, 90, 100, 135 cases, that is, of individual patients a day, 7 days a week, I don't think that I get a dozen colds brought to me or a dozen flu in a whole winter time. Why? Because all those who have brought themselves to my consciousness are governed by the truth governing my consciousness, and they are freed, especially in proportion as they can accept this freedom. There isn't any reason, I don't mean by that any of us may not come down under it. That is part of the universal mesmerism, that anyone can get caught off guard. There'll be no criticism and no judgment if they do or if I do. I'm not standing on a platform and saying it can't happen to me. One of our teachers did that a few weeks ago. Got up on the platform in a city where there was a good deal of flu, and he says, "You see, I know too much for that. It can't happen to me." And the next Sunday he was home with flu. I'm coming to the point of saying anything can't happen to me. I've come to the point, though, of saying this, that God is the principle and law of my being, and I know it. If I knew it consciously, spiritually, to the fullness of wisdom, well, of course, then no degree of error could ever enter my consciousness or be made manifest. But I can only demonstrate what I know to the degree of its spiritual embodiment within me. In other words, it's possible to go out of this classroom and know all the truth that's ever been known in the world. As a matter of fact, you will know. At least you will have had the opportunity of knowing all the truth that's ever been revealed in the history of the world. But frankly, 99% of it won't do you much good. Because what you learn intellectually is not the demonstration thereof. It is only that which, out of the whole teaching, makes such an impression upon you as to take root in your consciousness that you will demonstrate or manifest. That is why some people, in coming into truth, very quickly show forth healthy bodies. Other people do not quite make that grade, but they bring out a harmonious sense of supply or a harmonious sense of family life. It is because that particular truth has registered in their consciousness and the other hasn't yet. And so it is. It's in proportion to that. Some years ago, I had an eye affliction, and it didn't yield. And because I needed the use of the eyes, I was examined, and it was found that I had an incurable condition of the eyes and had to have a special lens. Well, I wore that for a year. It wasn't a lens that could heal anything. They haven't found any way to heal this disease, this condition. I don't know if it's a disease, it's a physical condition. But this lens corrects it as long as the lens is on. The minute you take the lens off, the condition's back there again. But about a year after I had these lenses made, I was reading a poem of the English mystic, Blake, and all of a sudden I read these lines. We do not see with our eyes, we see through our eyes. And something registered like that, and I felt a click in the back of my head. And I went to have my eyes examined, and I'd been healed of that incurable condition. I still needed glasses for seeing close print. It didn't strike in that direction, but it did strike in the other. And I've been completely free of that other condition, which was the incurable condition, ever since. And so it is, you see, it isn't the truth we intellectually know, it's the truth that actually registers within us, that which we attain a consciousness of. And it is for that reason that while we do not make affirmations and denials to try to enforce something, we do continuously know the truth until the moment of transition when we know it so deep within our consciousness that we don't have to consciously know it anymore. Now, one of these truths that we have to know... Oh, I didn't know you were here. I didn't see you. One of these truths that we have to consciously know is, of course, that it is the soul of us, at the center of our being, that governs and determines the harmony of our existence. It is the soul of us. It isn't something that's happening out in the world. It isn't anything to do with whether they're throwing bombs or not throwing bombs. It hasn't anything to do with whether there's infection or contagion or not. It has to do with a realization of the truth that the government of our bodies, the government of our business, the government of our homes, the government of everything concerning us is the government of soul at the center of our being. The only objection to that sometimes is this, that people say, if that is so, why do you have this or that discordant condition? And the answer is, how do you know it's discordant? It may be a matter of adjustment. There are times when, in human sense, we go through trials that seem to us to be a lack of demonstration, whereas they are the very demonstration necessary to our unfoldment at that moment, and there would be no way of waking into the full spiritual truth without that experience. Never judge by appearances, never call a problem, but get used to the idea that problems are opportunities. You see, and here is the depth of this thing. As long as we are dependent on person, place, or thing, as long as we are victims of outside conditions or beliefs, we really haven't made our full demonstration. Our full demonstration is when we find our freedom in Christ. Let us just use that term for a moment. When we find our freedom in Christ. You remember, when you are set free by the Son, you are free indeed. And that means this. When this spiritual illumination takes place within us that reveals to us that we are not dependent for our living on person or job or activity or student or patient, that actually it is the unfolding of God in our consciousness that supports us. That's freedom in Christ on the subject of supply. For instance, when we get to a point of conviction that the organs and functions of the body are not affected by the calendar, are not affected by foods or weather or climate, that the organs and functions of the body are subject only to this consciousness of truth, then are we physically freed in Christ on that score. And so it is when we come to a place where we do not require human companionship, where we're no more at a loss if mother or father or child or sister or brother happens to live at the other end of the world, where it doesn't concern us if we never see them physically again, where we can love them just as well 1,000 miles away as we can when they're next door. When we have become freed from dependence on human personality and human closeness, and find ourselves being companioned by the kingdom of God within, even though it appears outwardly as some friends today and a different one tomorrow, then we are freed in that direction by Christ. In other words, our full demonstration lies in the degree of freedom we attain from outer conditions. And when we come to the point where we say, I live yet not I, Christ liveth my life, where we just become the beholder, where we just get up in the morning and say, well, Father, wonder what's happening today. And let each event follow another joyously, freely. Follow each lead as it comes. Do that which is given to us to do at the moment without a desire to be doing something else, without a desire to be someplace else. That's hard when you think of Hawaii, but we can do it too. We can even do that. However, when we do get to that place of transition, where we take our life hour by hour, day by day, and become a beholder of it, watch it unfold. Watch God place our work in our hands today. Watch God place those in our charge today that God is going to take care of for us. Watch these things unfold in God's own way. Then are we free indeed. Then are we free of humanness, of personalities, of physical dependencies. In other words, we have an infinite invisible, what Mr. Hamblin called the hidden power, that governs and controls our lives and makes them over anew. It brings about our reincarnation because it makes us die to the man we were and be reborn into the image and likeness of Christ.